13 spooky spirits. Hey guys, Culture here. Today we're going to look at 13 spooky spirits. More specifically, we'll describe the torturous methods they use to terrify living people and how their legends came into being. Of course, not all spirits are menacing, some of them are actually pretty helpful, like the ghost that haunts this set, Cat Aldergray.
Hi!
See, she's adorable.
So long as you don't get on my mean side.
Oh yeah, like when Crash brought a priest into the studio and you went all Reagan from The Exorcist on him.
Ah, good times. It took Crash a whole week to get the vomit out of his shirt.
I used the photo of him walking backwards down the stairs on his hands and feet while I smiled in the foreground as our family Christmas picture that year.
Wait, why didn't I get to be in it?
You were. You're that blurry smudge just above Crash.
Oh yeah. Sometimes it sucks being a ghost.
Come on, these ghosts can do plenty of cool things, like these 13 spooky spirits. Number 1. Kuchisake Onna is a female spirit whose mouth has been sliced open from ear to ear, a Glasgow smile as they say. As if the image of that isn't terrifying enough, this spirit is also almost definitely going to kill you. The story goes that an extraordinarily narcissistic woman once cheated on her samurai husband with another man. When the samurai found out, he split her mouth open and asked, "Who will think you are beautiful now?" The woman now exists as a vengeful spirit, the Kuchisake Onna, who traps people with her questions. As you walk down a dimly lit street, you may see her with a surgical mask or fan covering her face, whereupon she will ask you, "Do you think I'm pretty?" Answer no and she'll kill you there on the spot. Answer yes and she will reveal to you her disfigured smile and ask, "How about now?" If you scream or respond negatively in any way, she'll slit your mouth open like hers before killing you. Here's the worst part. Even if you say she's still beautiful, she'll follow you home and kill you on your doorstep. According to the legend, the only way to survive is to either confuse Kuchisake Onna with an uncertain answer, like "you're kind of attractive," or to say that you can't answer right now as you have a prior appointment, in which case she will apologize for being impolite and leave. Number 2. Huggin Molly is a spirit from a small town called Abbeville in Alabama in the US. Supposedly, Molly would appear as a 7-foot-tall woman dressed in all black with a wide-brimmed hat late at night. Her victims were kids who stayed out past their curfew, and her punishment was simultaneously terrifying and creepy. Molly chases the children down once they see her, grabs them tight, and then screams in their ears. Of course, the logical explanation here is that Huggin Molly is a story made up by adults to make sure that their kids get home on time. But some people say Molly is based on a real person, a professor at a local university who would try to keep students safe by scaring the hell out of them so they'd stay in at night. The legend is so intimately related to the culture of the town that a diner opened up called Huggin Molly's, where you can order deliciously battered chicken fingers called Molly Fingers. Yuck. Number 3. Mylings are the spirits of children abandoned by their mothers at a very young age. The tale stems from the numerous instances of infanticide in Scandinavia, where young mothers who could not support their children were forced to leave them in the snow. In some versions of the stories, Mylings are depicted as vengeful spirits who want to track down their mothers and kill them. If you come across the Myling, the only way to set its spirit at ease is to show it love, thus giving the child the affection it needs. The other version of the story is far more interesting though, in my opinion. Upon finding a traveller, the Myling latches onto their back and asks to be taken to a graveyard or some other sacred site where it can be put to rest. As the traveller walks, the Myling drains their life force and grows larger, heavier, dragging the traveller down into the snow. In most cases, the traveller is released from this effect once they deliver the child, and survives, but some poor souls die out there in the snow just like the Myling did. Number 4. In the 90s, in the Indian city of Bengaluru, a rumour spread of a malevolent witch visiting people's houses to kill the man of the household. She would lure the man out by speaking in the voice of a loved one, maybe their wife or child, and if the man answered the door, then he would die in the next 24 hours. This witch didn't have a form as such, and the method of killing is unspecified, but one fact about the spirit is constant: how to deter it. Locals would write the words "Nale Ba" on their door, which essentially means "come tomorrow." The spirit would, rather obligingly, follow these orders and leave the house alone. This myth died out in the 2000s, but left many doors in Bengaluru marked with the foreboding Nale Ba as a reminder. Number 5. The Dungarvan Whooper is a spirit that haunts the Dungarvan River in eastern Canada, where a greedy murder took place. The story goes that Ryan, a young cook, travelled with a band of woodsmen out into the forest with all his belongings. He was a loud boy, often talking himself up, but also providing amusement to the rest of the lumber camp with his whooping and hollering. Among his belongings was a money pouch, of which he boasted how large it was. The camp's boss took note of this, and decided to stay back with Ryan while the woodsmen went out to chop down trees. One day, the woodsmen returned to find Ryan dead in the snow, the camp's boss claiming he had suddenly taken ill and died. Suspiciously, however, his money pouch was missing. The woodsmen were too afraid to confront their superior, and so ignored the dubious circumstances, burying Ryan's body out in the woods. But as they lay down to sleep that night, a noise rose above the howl of the wind, the whooping of young Ryan. Some stories say his body was later put to rest by a priest, while others say you can still hear his whooping in the area. Number 6. Diogen is a foggy spirit that inhabits the Sonian forest in Belgium. As people drive by the forest, they report seeing a green or sometimes orange fog, in which shadowy creatures flit about. At the center is one large being that seemingly peers back out at passers-by, thus giving the spirit its name, which in Dutch means the eyes. Diogen doesn't really seem to have any motive per se, but is rather just an oddity of the area. Rubbernecks have been reported as veering off the road when catching sight of the fog, but this seems accidental. Supposedly, the fog was first described in 1937 in a book called The Children of the Haunted Forest. By this account, the fog was a supernatural explanation for a serial killer who murdered children and dumped their bodies in the Sonian forest. Nuns would later find the burned remains scattered about 80 children in total. That certainly would give a macabre rationale for the shadowy figures that inhabit Diogen. Number 7. The Popobawa is a Shetani, an evil spirit in Tanzanian culture. This being, a demon essentially, is one of the most ruthless spirits that exists because it acts purely out of self-interest with no redeeming, pitiable backstory. The Popobawa is usually depicted as a bat-winged humanoid with a single glowing eye in the middle of its head, though it can also shapeshift into other animals if need be to attack or flee. Looking into its eye paralyzes the victim, leaving them vulnerable so the Popobawa can sodomize them. Yeah, that's right. This whole spirit's purpose is to sodomize people who don't believe in it, as though to garner more fame in the community of Zanzibar. Accounts of the spirit appeared in 1965, but rose to hysteria in the 1970s when a series of rape cases spurred the spirit's story forth. Oddly, the tale of the Popobawa always gains popularity during election years, suggesting that political candidates spread the story to destabilize voters and gain votes from their fear. This notion of using spiritual subterfuge is almost as terrifying as the Popobawa itself. Number 8. Vicco Parry is a spirit that inhabits the mountains of Pakistan and India, blocking travelers through the foothills. She appears as a woman in need of help, but can entirely change her appearance to deceive people. Well, almost entirely. Vicco Parry does have one unique, creepy feature that she can't disguise: her backwards-facing feet. This spirit's motive is odd though. She just kind of likes to mess with people. She appears, plays the damsel in distress act, and then vanishes when people get freaked out by her crazy feet. I wonder if there's a foot fetish guy out there who'd love to meet this girl. Number 9. Old Book is a spirit who haunts the grounds of Peoria State Hospital in Illinois, a mental asylum. But despite the overwhelming litany of scary asylum ghost stories, Old Book was quite different. The asylum's director, Dr. George Zeller, had a much more gentle approach to psychotherapy than was common in those days, removing bars and cages in favor of community living. One patient, listed as a bookbinder in files, became the heart of the asylum. Given the role of the asylum's gravedigger, Bookbinder would do his work, then lean against a nearby elm tree and sob. For every single person he buried, his sadness was genuine. When his time came, he too was buried, and 400 people turned out for his funeral. Patients, doctors, and nurses came to pay their respects. However, as the casket was lowered into the grave, it sprung up a bit from the ropes holding it in place. It was as though it was empty. The Journal of Dr. Zeller reported that the entire congregation heard at once the weeping of Bookbinder, affectionately called Old Book, from the elm tree. They turned, and there he stood, weeping more profusely than ever. When they opened the coffin though, his body was still inside, and the sobbing ceased. Number 10. Pesta is a spirit that takes the form of an old lady who combs through towns, killing all the inhabitants. The story goes that if Pesto arrived with a rake in hand, some of the villagers would be spared and survive, but if she arrived with a broom, every single person would die. This story originated in Norway in the 14th century as an explanation for the Black Plague. It's often said that the Black Plague claimed the lives of half the population of Norway. No wonder then that people tried to personify this horror with a single spirit in an attempt to understand it. Interestingly, the origin of the Black Plague in Scandinavia has its own spooky story. The plague is thought to have washed ashore on a ghost ship, a derelict ship whose crew has died or disappeared. The ship drifted into Bergen Harbour in Norway, with rats and fleas carrying the plague onto land. Number 11. A story in Thailand tells of a woman named Nak, who was married to a man named Mac. Mac was sent off to war, and shortly after, Nak found out she was pregnant. Unfortunately, before Mac could return, Nak died, and she and her child came back as spirits. But Nak's love for Mac was so strong that she remained in her home, waiting for Mac's return. When Mac arrived back, he found his wife and child waiting for him, but he was warned by the other townspeople that they were actually ghosts. Mac refused to believe them, until one day when he saw Nak's arm elongate grotesquely to catch a fallen lemon. He fled to a shrine in fear, and Nak grew angry with the townspeople for offering him sanctuary. A monk was finally able to calm Nak, telling her that in the afterlife she would be reunited with her husband. She became known as Mai Chan, and in the Phrakanong district of Bangkok, there's a shrine dedicated to her, where patrons will pay their respects and pray for good health. People donate generously to the statue of Mai Chan, with clothes for her child and golden leaves. Number 12. In the 1770s, a Lutheran named Adam Livingston moved to West Virginia with his family, hoping to start a new life. However, his family soon became the victim of a haunting, with strange phenomena occurring throughout the house. Rocks were rolled through vacant rooms, the sound of horses galloping echoed through the halls, and perhaps the weirdest phenomena of all, clothes and other fabrics would mysteriously be cut to shreds as though clipped by invisible scissors. This last trait earned the spirit the name of Wizard Clip, a famous tale in West Virginia. The Livingstons were only able to banish the spirit by enlisting the help of a Catholic priest, as no Protestant priests in the area were able to put the strange occurrences to rest. With the Catholic priest's guidance, the family subdued the spirit. From then on, they were instead visited by a mysterious voice that led them in the practices and beliefs of Catholicism. You know what, now I think about it, this whole story is probably just Catholic propaganda. Number 13. The dragon is a giant sea spirit in Norwegian folklore that forms from the souls of deceased sailors. In their ghostly forms, they massively increase in size and take on a seaweed-clad existence as terrors of the deep. If you're stuck in a storm in the middle of the sea, you'll first be alerted to the dragon's presence by a deep wailing sound, before actually seeing the monstrous form rise up in front of your ship. The dragon will then drag the boat to the sea floor, turning the sailors aboard into even more dragon. If you hope to survive, you need to beat the dragon back to shore before he can sink your ship. But even then, one story tells of a man who, despite winning the race to shore, was still tracked down by the dragon. He sought refuge in a graveyard, but when the townsfolk followed his trail there in the morning, all the graves were empty and the grounds were littered with seaweed. With so many stories of vindictive phantoms out there, there's only one way I can sleep at night, curled in a ball cuddling my teddy bear. See you all next week. If you enjoy what we do here at CultureCrash, please consider supporting the show via our Patreon, where we have a bunch of awesome rewards, or by checking out our online store. All links are in the description below.